My name is Gary Chapman. I'm an artist and professor of painting and drawing at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I was selected this year as the select artist for the Tennessee Arts Academy, which this year will be virtual. So we're creating this virtual exhibition experience showcasing 5 bodies of work. They're all black and white. I tend to see this body of these collections of works as sort of the peripheral to my larger work, which is much more conceptually based figurative painting. This work sort of sprung out of the fact that over the last 10 years I've been teaching these charcoal workshops at galleries and museums and universities. And I wanted to start incorporating some of that into the process of my regular work, and so that's how these series sort of evolved. The virtual experience will showcase the charcoal drawings, the black metal series, the Firmament, falling, floating, and flying, as well as the 108 black paintings in the COTA project and the construction series. So in 2000, I was selected by the Tennessee Arts Academy to conduct one of my charcoal workshops, which is a week long. These are workshops that I teach all over the country at galleries and museums and universities. And so many of the drawings are in fact demos that I've conducted for those workshops. I teach a week-long workshop every year at Achromatic School of Arts and Crafts. So a lot of these drawings come out of that sort of free time I have at night. In that workshop, I talk a lot about the mantra, which is the contrast of various elements, of soft edge, of sharp edge, of dense, opaque black, and translucent, milky, smoky gray. The contrast of value, the contrast of opacity, and let alone atmospheric effects and the contrast of light and dark. And so the idea is that we focus on mark making and work through the drawing and allowing it to evolve and sort of become something. And it's less about observation, looking at landscapes or portraits or still lives. It's more about the beauty of the mark and choreographing those marks within these atmospheres that we create to create a largely abstract but very realistic drawing in context to light and dark, space, movement, and volume. So the black metal series might be the most unique body of work that we're showcasing, at least for my work, in that several years ago I started painting on aluminum, which is arguably a very archival material, and it opens the door to a lot of interesting effects. And cutting down the aluminum, I would often end up with these small scraps, and I don't like to throw anything away, so I sort of save these aluminum scraps, and at some point I started mounting them to small wooden panels and putting grounds on them, grounds that I teach in the charcoal workshop. Now I can grind back into the paint and down through the charcoal, through the graphite, and into the aluminum, revealing the metal. They're much like technical little drawings. I like to allude to, the analytical eye or the optical eye, the lens, and so often there are graphs, thin lines that sort of suggest citing and referencing, mapping. There's also a lot of spinning circular patterns, and that has to do with the drill press and various ways I grind back into the metal. So they're sort of a fun little series for me, and of course they focus on black, this sort of beautiful ground I sort of taught myself, which is to lay a layer of graphite down, which is this beautiful, beautiful steely dark gray, and then to layer oil paint over top of that translucent black paint, so the gray is a very subtle background effect, and then grinding the sort of more notable objects into the space. And so the subtlety of the background becomes even more subtle because of sort of the garish notion of these grinded in marks, lines, circles, and patterns. Since I'm not really looking at anything, I'm sort of allowing myself to just kind of respond to the ground that I've already laid. I often reference things like numbers. So the example of 3, I happen to be one of 3 children. 3 is sort of a magical number for me. I've also have used 5 a lot, coming from the family of 5. And now that my family is 3, my wife, my daughter, and I. There's some symbolism in them, but they're really just mindful play with choreography, composition, and playing with the various elements and deciding when and where to grind, how big, and sometimes alluding to the landscape, sometimes alluding to atmosphere. They're fun little paintings that sort of glorify the notion of black as a beautiful color. Recently, I had a sabbatical from UAB and was awarded a residency at the Gentile Artist Residency Ranch in Wyoming. During that time, I produced 12 paintings that I referred to as the Firmament, falling, floating, and flying. I've always been fascinated by work that is powerful yet provocative. And what I mean by that is there's a powerful image speaks for itself. But the provocation opens a question. And so I've always been intrigued by work that seems to have that power, but it's left to the viewer to interpret. So the Firmament, the Falling, Floating, and Flying series, literally is how do you interpret these figures that are suspended in space? Are they in fact suspended? Are they falling? Are they floating? Or are they flying? And I think as you look through the series, it's easy to identify certain figures as one sort of activity and other figures doing something else. But it's really largely left open to the interpretation. And it started just with this sheer love of movement in space, of these bodies that are falling and floating and moving around each other, as sort of a metaphor for, relationships and life and where we find ourselves. There's a beautiful quote by Stuart Stafford that I think I feel very comfortable in reading and putting it in the context of the work. Nature, with its paradoxical twin firmaments of breathtaking beauty and extreme cruelty, never explains itself and cares even less for our admiration and acceptance. That quote, in such an elegant way, I think, captures what I'm trying to do in the series. And that is, I think we've all experienced both wonderfully beautiful things in life as well as horrific and painful moments. And to really understand life is to embrace both of those things. That's what life is. So the 108 Black Paintings in the COTA project actually consists of 3 elements. There are the 108 black paintings, which are poured black acrylic onto glass panels. There are the COTA drawings, there are actually 5, but I generally just show the 3 as part of this sort of altar-like installation. Those 3 drawings were generated in Children's Hospital with myself, my daughter, and several other patients. And then lastly, there are 2 oil canvases, 2 and 3, and they are, for me, sort of the pinnacle or the realization of the project. So in 1996, my daughter Sadie was born. She was born with a very serious heart defect known as left hypoplastic heart syndrome. Over the years, she's had 2 open heart surgeries, one at 9 months, one at 8 years old. She had gone off to college in New York, and right at the age of 18, between 19, her heart began to fail. She went to Montefiore Hospital in New York. They discovered that Dr. Kirkland was her doctor, world-renowned heart surgeon, and they sent her home, and Sadie, in fact, had a heart transplant. The 108 Black Paintings in the COTA project spring forth out of that year-long experience of identifying the heart that was failing, and then 108 days waiting for the appropriate heart for Sadie. The 108 Black Paintings were produced after Sadie's surgery, and when I got back into the studio and felt like I couldn't go to the easel, I couldn't paint, but I had all this time. And so I took a page from the Materiality of Paint book and just started mindlessly producing 108 paintings that represented the 108 days that I waited as a father who could do nothing but wait. They ended up being the catalyst for me getting back into the studio and actually making work. While we were in the hospital, I'm a bit obsessive compulsive and I've got to do something, and we were in the hospital for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 108 days until we got the heart. Of course, there were many more days after that. But while I was there, I started creating these drawings, the cathartic heart drawings. And there are 3 drawings that represent Sadie in various stages in that process, and the many other heart patients that we met. In fact, I had children at the hospital draw the little hearts that surround the larger hearts in those drawings. So that's why they're referred to as the COTA drawings. COTA stands for Children's Organ Transplant Association. So while the 108 black paintings got me back into the studio and making work, as I said, it was very different than the work I typically make. It really was the last 2 paintings in the project, 2 and 3, that sort of were the capstone to the entire concept of the body of work. 2 is a dialogue about the 2 people who came together to make one. Sadie's heart failed, her donor's heart was fine, but the donor passed, and together they came together to be one living being. 3 represents the family, my wife, myself, and my daughter, who miraculously come through this collision and come out of it whole again. So the construction series also stems from my charcoal workshop, in that I teach students how to do a 3-point perspective sort of architectural space drawing with charcoal, erasers, and chamois. I enjoy the process so much. At about 4 years ago, I decided to draw them on a rather large scale. And so the birth of the construction series comes from a drawing machine that I created, mounted to the wall with 8-foot strips of wood that I could anchor into the wall and create my points of perspective. But they're much larger. They range from 4 to 5 feet. And eventually I started doing them on aluminum as well, so that I could carve back into the aluminum and reveal moments of light or metal revealed in all the murkiness of the charcoal, graphite, and paint. So with my drawings, with the construction series, I decided to go much larger on wooden panels. I also started incorporating a second panel with them, because for me the construction series was looking at the idea of construction, about organization of materials. And so when you see the 3-point perspective drawings, I think most people immediately think of architecture, the grid, and yet the grid exists in nature as well. It's as natural as it is synthetic. The other panels, which deal with ink on Yupo paper and creating these sort of biomorphic fluid forms, was a way for me to contrast what we know as organic with something that appears to be more synthetic. So there are these 2 different operating structures about movement in space, which is either organic or synthetic. I have always loved this Bob Dylan quote, that behind every beautiful thing, there's been some kind of pain. That quote has stuck with me for well over 10 years, and I think it really solidifies everything I try to do in my work. I've never been interested in that which is pretty, but I love the idea of beauty. And so the distinction for me is pretty is that sort of superficial, vacuous kind of aesthetic. And beauty is much deeper. Beauty touches on much more than just aesthetics, but the sort of completion of what it is you're observing, whether it's a thing or a person. I've never wanted to create pretty paintings, but I love the idea of creating beautiful paintings. Beautiful that address those wonderful experiences in life as well as the horrific. Because the moment you separate one or the other, it becomes unreal. It becomes unrecognizable or meaningless. I think it's through the collection of those experiences, both the good and bad, that there is this really holistic understanding of life, that life is beautiful.